The sky was a deep, foreboding gray, like a physical manifestation of the desperation that gripped the hearts of the people below. The air was heavy with the smell of dust and dirt, the earthy scent of the land itself being torn asunder. On April 14, 1935, a massive dust storm, known as a duster, swept through the town of Boise City, Oklahoma, reducing visibility to near zero, and the sounds of panic and chaos filled the air. The wailing of children, the barking of dogs, the crashing of windows. The storm, which would come to be known as Black Sunday, was a monster, a behemoth of dust and debris that stretched across the Great Plains from Texas to the Dakotas. The temperature was a sweltering 95 degrees, the heat only adding to the sense of desperation that gripped the people of Boise City. As the storm raged on, the people of Boise City huddled together, waiting for it to pass, but it seemed to have no end. The howling wind sounded like a chorus of the damned, the dust stinging skin like 1,000 needles. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the storm stopped. The silence was deafening, the stillness a stark contrast to the chaos that had come before. But in the midst of this devastation, something else was brewing, a sense of determination, of resilience, that would define the people of the Great Plains for generations to come. The dust-covered streets were empty, the only sound the soft crunch of dust beneath the feet of the few brave souls who ventured out. The sun beat down on the desolate landscape, casting a golden glow over the devastation. But to understand how we got here, we must go back to the beginning of this story, to the days when the Great Plains were a thriving, vibrant landscape, full of hope and promise. The smell of fresh earth and new life filled the air, the sounds of laughter and children playing carried on the wind. It was a time of great change, of great upheaval, and it would set the stage for one of the greatest environmental disasters in American history. The earthy scent of the land, the warmth of the sun on skin, the sound of birds singing in the distance, all of these things would soon be lost, replaced by the harsh realities of the Dust Bowl. As we delve into this story, the memories of that time will come alive, and we will see the people, the places, and the events that shaped this pivotal moment in American history. The gentle breeze carried the whispers of the past, the soft rustle of leaves, the distant rumble of thunder. All of these things will be explored as we journey through the Dust Bowl and uncover the secrets of this devastating disaster. In the years leading up to the Dust Bowl, the Great Plains were a canvas of promise, stretching endlessly beneath a wide, blue sky. It was a land where the wind whispered secrets through the rustling wheat fields and the sun cast golden hues on the rolling prairies. Farmers, full of hope and ambition, tilled the fertile soil, believing they were in a golden age of agriculture. The year was 1929, and the country was buoyant with dreams of prosperity. But the winds of change were gathering, masked by the idyllic beauty of the landscape. The people of the plains were resilient. There was Clara Johnson, a spirited woman of 30, who, with her weathered hands, coaxed the stubborn earth beneath her feet. She tilled her family's 100 acres in Boise City, Oklahoma, her laughter ringing through the air like the chimes of a distant bell, brightening the faces of her 3 children, who played in the dust clouds stirred by the passing tractors. Each morning the sun would rise, casting a warm glow on her modest farmhouse, and Clara would step outside, breathing in the scent of dew-soaked soil and the sweet aroma of the wildflowers that dotted the landscape. It was a world alive with possibility. But as the Great Depression unfolded, its grip tightening around the nation, the joy of the harvest began to wane. Farmers like Clara found themselves caught in a precarious balance. They had dug deeper into the earth, stretching their plows over more land, believing that with each furrow they were fortifying their futures. The sound of metal scraping against soil was a symphony of industry, a testament to their hard work and determination. Yet, with each passing season, the rains grew more scarce, the earth more brittle, and the once lush fields began to show signs of wear. Clara often gazed out at endless rows of golden wheat, imagining the bounty they would yield. She dreamt of the market stalls overflowing with produce, the sweet taste of fresh bread rising in the oven, and the laughter of her children as they celebrated the harvest with friends and neighbors. But the laughter began to fade, replaced by the haunting silence of empty fields. The soil, once rich and dark, took on a pale hue, cracking under the relentless sun. The temperature soared, sometimes reaching a sweltering 95 degrees, turning the air thick and heavy, as if the very sky was holding its breath. In the neighboring town of Guyman, Oklahoma, young Tom Thompson, just 18, shared Clara's dreams. With eyes full of hope, he longed to inherit his father's farm and carry on the family legacy. He spent his days learning the rhythms of the land, the feel of the earth, the scent of freshly tilled soil, and the sounds of nature awakening with the dawn. But as the drought deepened, Tom found himself battling against an unseen enemy, one that turned his dreams to dust. The wind, once a gentle caress, now bore down with a fierce intensity, sweeping across the Great Plains with a vengeance. The tension in the air was palpable. The farmers banded together, attending meetings in musty barns where the smell of sweat mingled with the faint scent of hay. They spoke of the need for rain, of the salvation that lay in the clouds, but as days turned into weeks and weeks into months, their hopes dimmed. Clara and Tom exchanged worried glances, their hearts heavy with the burden of uncertainty. The camaraderie of the community was palpable, yet the struggle for survival was isolating. Each farmer's plight seemed like a solitary battle against nature, a battle they were slowly losing. The more they planted, the more the soil eroded, stripped bare of its nutrients. Dust began to swirl in the air, a fine powder that settled on windowsills and choked the life out of their crops. Clara would watch as her children coughed and sputtered, their laughter replaced by the harshness of a world turned gray. The once vibrant fields which had danced with life were now eerily silent. The sweet smell of wildflowers gave way to an acrid stench, a warning of the devastation to come. As the summer of 1931 began, a fierce drought gripped the land. The sun scorched the earth, and the wind howled like a pack of wolves, prowling the plains for its next victim. Clara's dreams of a bountiful harvest faded further. The golden wheat fields that had once stretched proudly toward the horizon now lay parched and lifeless. She could feel the weight of despair settling over her, like a heavy blanket, as she trudged through the dust that had replaced her once thriving garden. Tom, too, felt the weight of hopelessness. He spent long nights staring at the stars, wondering if there was a way out of this nightmare. He remembered the laughter of his friends, the joy of a summer harvest, but all that remained was a haunting reminder of what they had lost. The earth was cracking, and with it, their spirits began to fracture too. They were not just fighting the land, they were fighting their own dreams, their own identities. The tension grew, and whispers of despair turned into cries for help. The government, sensing the impending crisis, began to take notice. But for Clara and Tom, it felt like too little, too late. Their world was crumbling around them, choking on the dust of their dreams. It was a moment suspended in time, a crossroads in the history of the Great Plains where the light of hope flickered dimly against the encroaching darkness. Amidst this turmoil, the spirit of resilience still flickered in the hearts of many. Clara and Tom, though weary, were not ready to surrender. They clung to the fading echoes of laughter, the warmth of community, and the deep-rooted belief that the land, though suffering, could be healed. Little did they know that the trials ahead would not only test their endurance, but also reshape the very fabric of their lives. As night fell over the Great Plains, a blanket of stars twinkled overhead, a stark contrast to the struggles below. The air was cool and still, carrying with it the bittersweet scent of earth and the promise of a new dawn, a dawn they hoped would bring respite from the relentless grip of despair. And so, the story of the Dust Bowl began, unfolding against the backdrop of dreams and struggles, resilience and loss, in a world that was on the brink of change. As the 1930s unfolded, the landscape of the Great Plains seemed to promise a future ripe with possibility. The golden fields of wheat swayed gently in the summer breeze, their delicate whispers mingling with the laughter of children playing in the sun-drenched afternoons. Farmers like Tom Thompson and Clara Johnson, vibrant souls with dreams as vast as the endless horizon, embodied the spirit of an era that believed in progress. They were part of a movement, an unshakable faith in the land that sustained them and the advancements that modern agriculture had introduced. In the year 1929, when the stock market crashed and the echoes of prosperity turned into whispers of despair across the nation. The people of the Great Plains held on to their hope with fierce determination. They believed in the strength of their soil, in the science that could help them yield a bountiful harvest. New tractors, equipped with the latest technology, roared to life, their engines humming a promising tune. The scent of fresh earth filled the air, mingling with the aroma of sun-warmed grass as the farmers plowed deeper into the land, turning over the topsoil that had been the foundation of their livelihoods. Yet, beneath the surface of this idyllic existence, a fragile balance was being disrupted. The earth, once rich and dark, began to show signs of wear. The winds that had danced playfully through the fields now began to carry an ominous tone. It was a subtle shift, imperceptible at first, but then it grew louder, like a distant thunderstorm approaching, gathering strength. By the time the Great Depression had taken hold, the whispers of the land were turning into cries for help, but the farmers, resolute, pressed on, convinced that with hard work and perseverance, they could conquer any challenge. The days turned into weeks, the weeks into months, and as 1930 rolled in, the promise of rain became a shared dream among the community. Tom often found himself leaning against the weathered wooden fence that bordered his fields, looking out toward the vast expanse of his land, his heart heavy with hope. Clara, with her gentle spirit, would join him, her hand resting softly on his arm. Together, they would gaze at the sky, where the clouds hung low, teasing them with the possibility of rain. The air was thick with the scent of anticipation, but the skies remained stubbornly clear, their blue a constant reminder of what was slipping away. As the drought tightened its grip, the ground, once a friend, began to betray them. The earth cracked open, parched and barren, a stark contrast to the lushness they had known. The wind, once a gentle caress, transformed into a relentless force, stirring up dust and soil, creating clouds that blotted out the sun. By April of 1935, the Great Plains had become a theater of despair. On that fateful day, now etched in history as Black Sunday, the wind howled like a wounded animal, and the temperature soared to a staggering 95 degrees. Dust swirled in the air, a thick, suffocating blanket that coated everything in an oppressive haze. The people of Boise City, Oklahoma, and Guymon, Oklahoma, found themselves in an apocalyptic nightmare. The fine particles of soil invaded their homes, filling every nook and cranny. Clara, with her keen sense of smell, recalled how the air once smelled of blooming wildflowers. Now, it was tainted with a gritty, acrid taste that settled uncomfortably in their throats. Children who had once played freely outside, their laughter ringing through the air, were now confined within the walls of their homes, eyes wide with fear as the wind howled like a banshee. But even in this chaos, resilience flickered like the last glow of a dying ember. The farmers banded together, sharing what little food they had left, their camaraderie a lifeline amid the suffocating despair. They would gather on porches, the wooden boards creaking beneath their weight, and talk in hushed tones about what might have been. If only the rains would return, if only the government would step in, if only the soil could be healed. They shared stories of their ancestors who had tamed this land, who had carved out a life from the untamed wilderness. There was strength in these stories, a balm for weary souls. As the dust storms continued to rage, the stories turned inward, reflecting a shared sense of loss. Clara, her heart heavy with the weight of memories, often recounted tales of the vibrant past, when the plains were lush and life seemed full of promise. The scent of freshly baked bread wafted through kitchens, laughter filled the air, and neighbors would gather for potlucks under the stars, their voices mingling with the night sounds of crickets and rustling leaves. Those were the times that made the present feel even more brutal. But the storms didn't relent. The relentless winds continued to whip through the plains, and the soil, once rich, was now a mere shadow of its former self. The people struggled to adapt, to survive. They began to learn about conservation, about the very soil they had taken for granted. Clinging to hope, they realized that perhaps they could revive the land if only they acted together. The government, too, began to respond, sensing the urgency of the situation. The establishment of the Soil Conservation Service in 1935 marked a turning point, a glimmer of light in an otherwise dark time. Yet the journey was fraught with difficulty. The people, weary and worn, were still in the grips of the storm. They longed for the vibrant past, for the rich earth that had once cradled their dreams. As they watched the dust storms rise, swirling like ghosts from the past, they understood that change was needed. Still, they held on to the belief that one day, the rains would return, and the plains would once again be filled with life. And so, amid the chaos, hope flickered in the hearts of those who endured. They believed in a future where they could rise from the ashes of despair, where the land would heal, and the skies would open up once more. The Dust Bowl may have been an environmental disaster, but the spirit of the people remained unbroken. As they faced the winds of change with unwavering resolve, ready to reclaim their place in the sun. The sun hung high in the sky on that fateful day, a relentless orb casting a shimmering haze over the parched land. It was April 14th, 1935, a day that would etch itself into the memories of those who lived through the calamity that was soon to unfold. The people of Boise City, Oklahoma, and the surrounding Great Plains were already weary, their skin bronzed and cracked from the unyielding drought. Dust, fine as flour, swirled in the air, a constant companion that choked the life out of the once bountiful fields. Sounds of desperation echoed through the empty streets, where the laughter of children had been replaced by the whispers of anxious parents, counting pennies, wondering how to feed their families. Clara Johnson stood at the window of her small farmhouse, the wood worn and splintered beneath her fingertips. She gazed out at the horizon, where the land met the sky in a blur of brown and gray. 3 months had passed without rain. The wind howled like a restless spirit, urging her to step outside, to face the barren earth that had become a cruel reminder of promises broken. She remembered a time not long ago when the fields danced with golden wheat, the bright green of corn stalks reaching toward the sun. Now the earth was a ghost, a canvas of despair. She took a deep breath, the air thick with dust and the scent of something lost. In the distance, Tom Thompson, a neighbor and close friend, emerged from the haze, pulling his battered hat down against the wind. He had been trying to keep his farm alive, but the soil was disintegrating beneath his feet, turning to powder, slipping away like the dreams of prosperity that once filled the hearts of the Great Plains farmers. As he approached Clara's home, the crunch of his boots against the dry earth seemed to resonate with the weight of their shared burden. They exchanged weary glances, eyes filled with the unspoken acknowledgement of their struggles. "Clara," he began, his voice hoarse from the dust, "I don't know how much longer we can hold on." The words hung in the air, heavy with the truth that neither wanted to face. The drought had become a thief, stealing their hopes and dreams, leaving them with nothing but the echoes of what once was. Clara nodded, her heart heavy, knowing that the moment had come when they could no longer fight against the forces of nature that had turned so cruel. The wind gusted, lifting a cloud of dust that danced around them like a spectral waltz. It was then, in the midst of that swirling storm, that the first ominous signs of the impending disaster began to show. The sky darkened, and an eerie silence enveloped the land, a stillness that felt unnatural. Clara and Tom exchanged worried glances, the air thick with foreboding. They had heard the stories of dust storms that could blot out the sun, but they had never imagined they would witness one. Then it happened. In an instant, the world transformed. The wind roared to life, a ferocious beast unleashed. It howled through the fields, carrying with it the very essence of the land, tearing apart the topsoil that had been their lifeblood. The dust storm arrived like an army, a wall of darkness that consumed everything in its path. Tom grabbed Clara's arm, pulling her inside as the tempest raged outside, the roar of the wind drowning out their cries. As they huddled in the dim light of the farmhouse, the sound of the storm was deafening. The walls creaked and groaned, the windows rattled, and the dust seeped through every crack, invading their sanctuary. Clara's heart raced, the weight of despair heavy on her chest. She could feel the grains of sand against her skin, invasive and relentless, as if the very earth was trying to reclaim what was rightfully its. Hours passed, though it felt like an eternity, before the storm finally began to wane. The sun, once a blinding beacon, was a mere memory, hidden behind the dense curtain of dust. When it was finally over, they stepped outside to a world unrecognizable. The landscape had been transformed into a desolate wasteland, a ceaseless sea of brown. The air was thick and suffocating, and Clara choked back tears as she surveyed the devastation. Tom stood beside her, his shoulders slumped in defeat. "This," he whispered, the weight of his words hanging heavily in the air. "This is what we've come to." They surveyed the remnants of their labor, the fields now barren, the crops reduced to nothing more than a memory. The human cost was staggering. Families torn apart, livelihoods obliterated, hopes dashed against the unforgiving terrain. Days turned into weeks as the effects of Black Sunday rippled through the community. The dust storms returned with a vengeance, relentless in their assault, leaving the people of the Great Plains grappling with despair. The once vibrant towns were reduced to ghostly echoes of their former selves. Clara watched as her neighbors packed their belongings, dust-covered and weary, leaving for distant lands in search of hope. She felt a deep pang of sorrow, knowing that with each departure, a piece of their shared history vanished. Tom, too, faced the harsh reality of their situation. The weight of responsibility bore down on him, and he fought against the urge to surrender to despair. He began to make plans, not just for survival, but for a future that seemed increasingly uncertain. The government, too, began to respond, recognizing the crisis that had engulfed the plains. The Soil Conservation Service was established, a beacon of hope amid the chaos, promoting practices that would restore the land. But for Clara and Tom, the scars of the Dust Bowl would linger long after the storms subsided. They felt the echoes of loss in every dust-laden breath, yet within that grief was a flicker of determination. They would rebuild. They would fight for their land, for their families, for the future. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren fields, Clara whispered a promise to the fading light. They would not be forgotten. They would rise again, together. The land may have been covered in dust, but beneath it lay the seeds of resilience, waiting for the rain. And with that thought, they stepped into the night, ready to confront whatever lay ahead. As the dust settled over Boise City, Oklahoma, the atmosphere thickened with a heavy silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the parched earth. It was April 14th, 1935, and the sun hung in the sky like a molten coin, casting an oppressive heat over the desolate plains. Clara Johnson stood on her front porch, her hands resting on the sun-bleached railing, watching the horizon blur under the weight of dust. She could feel the grit in her lungs, a constant reminder of the battle waged against nature's fury. In that moment, the world felt as though it had been stripped of life. The vibrant fields that once flourished with golden wheat and emerald grass now lay bare, their beauty ravaged by relentless drought and the fierce winds that howled like a pack of wolves. Clara's heart sank as she thought of Tom Thompson, who wasn't far away, grappling with the same despair. She could almost hear the creaking of his barn doors, the soft whimper of livestock inside, yearning for the rain that refused to fall. Tom had been out in the fields all morning, his face streaked with sweat and dust, a mask of determination amidst the chaos. The relentless sun bore down on him, but he pressed on, each shovelful of dirt a reminder of the crops he had once nurtured. He thought of the stock market crash in 1929 and how it had turned their lives upside down. That day felt like a distant nightmare now, overshadowed by the more pressing threat of the Dust Bowl. Yet he remembered the resilience of the land, the way it had thrived under the care of generations before him, and he was determined to fight for it. As Clara watched the eerie dance of dust in the distance, she felt a pang of longing for the past. She remembered the laughter of children playing in the fields, the smell of fresh hay, and the sound of the wind rustling through the leaves. That world felt so far away now, replaced by a haunting silence, punctuated only by the occasional cough or the wail of a child in the throes of illness. The Dust Bowl was not just a disaster of the land, it was a shattering of community, of families scattered across the vast expanse of the Great Plains. On that fateful day, as the sky darkened and the winds picked up, Clara felt a shift in the air, a portent of calamity. The dust storm, which would later be known as Black Sunday, was approaching with a terrifying swiftness. She turned her gaze back to Tom, who stood firm against the rising winds, his silhouette nearly swallowed by the swirling clouds of dirt. In that moment, she felt an acute realization. This would be the moment that defined them, the turning point that would either break them or forge them anew. The winds howled like 1,000 anguished souls, and the sky transformed into a swirling mass of brown, swallowing the sun and casting a pall over the land. Clara rushed to the door, her heart racing as she called for Tom, but her voice was lost in the cacophony of the storm. She stumbled inside, a whirlwind of thoughts battling for space in her mind. Would Tom be safe? Would their home withstand this tempest? Just then, Tom burst through the door, his clothes caked in dust, his eyes wide with the urgency of the moment. "Clara!" he shouted above the roar, his voice barely audible. "We need to close the windows, seal off the dust." Together, they worked swiftly, their hands moving in practiced synchronicity, shutting out the world that had turned hostile. As they sealed their sanctuary against the encroaching storm, the walls of their home trembled under the assault of the wind. Clara could feel the vibrations in her bones, unsettling yet grounding in the chaos. With each passing moment, the storm intensified, the air thickening with the scent of earth and despair. She caught glimpses of the world outside, trees bending, livestock huddled together, and the relentless storm clouds swirling. Hours passed in a blur of anxiety and determination. The storm raged on, and Clara felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on her. But in that suffocating darkness, she felt a flicker of something else, a spark of resilience that had always been a part of her, one that whispered for hope amidst despair. She looked at Tom, who was hunched over, trying to catch his breath. The lines on his face were etched deeper, a testament to their struggles, yet there was a fire in his eyes that ignited her spirit. When the storm finally began to ebb, a heavy silence fell over the room, punctuated only by the soft patter of dust settling. They cautiously opened the door, revealing a transformed landscape. The world outside was unrecognizable, draped in a thick layer of dust that obscured everything they had once known. The fields were barren, the sky an ominous shade of brown. It was as if they had stepped into a sepia photograph, one that had been left out in the sun too long. But amidst the desolation, Clara felt a shift within herself. She turned to Tom, whose face wore a mixture of shock and determination. "We can't give up," she said, her voice steady. "We have to rebuild. We have to fight for our land, for our future." Her words hung in the air, an anchor in the storm of despair. Tom nodded, his resolve mirroring hers. They stepped out into the dust-laden world together, their hands clasped tightly, a bond fortified by shared adversity. The Dust Bowl had taken so much from them, but it would not take their spirit. From that day forward, they would become advocates for change, fighting not just for their survival, but for the land itself. As the sun began to set, casting an ethereal glow over the landscape, Clara and Tom looked at one another, knowing this was not merely a turning point for them, but a moment that would ripple through time, an idea that would survive the storm. They would learn to adapt, to respect the land that had given them life, and together they would forge a new path forward, one rooted in resilience and hope. And so, amidst the remnants of their former life, they took the first steps into a new dawn, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The dust settled slowly, a thick blanket of grief draping itself over the land. In the days following Black Sunday, the sun struggled to pierce through the haze. The air thickened with the remnants of the storm, a choking reminder of the chaos that had unfolded. Clara Johnson stood in the doorway of her home, a battered structure that had once been a refuge filled with laughter and warmth. Now the remnants of happiness lay buried beneath layers of grit. She squinted into the distance, where the horizon seemed to waver, obscured by the swirling remnants of her life. Tom Thompson, weary and haunted, emerged from the shadows of the barn, his face streaked with dirt and despair. He had spent the hours after the storm searching for anything salvageable among the wreckage. The once vibrant fields of wheat, golden and waving in the summer breeze, were now lifeless. The soil, once rich and fertile, had turned to dust, a stark echo of the dreams that had taken root in this land. He brushed a hand across his brow, but it only smeared the grit deeper into his skin. The wind still whispered through the broken remnants of the barn, a ghostly sound that carried memories of laughter and toil. The aftermath of the Dust Bowl was not merely a physical devastation. It was an emotional desolation that seeped into the bones of every man, woman, and child in Boise City. Clara and Tom were not alone in their suffering. Families gathered in small clusters, their faces etched with loss. Some stood in silence, while others shared their stories, voices trembling like the fragile hopes they clung to. They were a community, yet at that moment they felt profoundly isolated, as if the storm had stolen not just their crops, but their very essence. Days turned into weeks, and the relentless sun beat down on the cracked earth. The smell of despair hung heavy in the air, mingling with the dust that seemed to infiltrate every corner of their lives. Clara watched as neighbors struggled to keep their homes intact, the sounds of shovels scraping against the ground punctuated by the occasional cry of a child or the soft weeping of a mother. It was a symphony of sorrow, a haunting melody that filled the void left by the storm. In the midst of the devastation, Clara found herself drawn to the small garden she had tended with care. It lay buried under a layer of dust, but she dug through it with determination. Her hands, raw and calloused, scraped against stones and tufts of withered grass as she sought the faintest hint of life. The scent of damp earth was a distant memory, but she clung to hope, running her fingers over the bare soil, imagining the vibrant blooms that once flourished there. Each seed she planted felt like an act of rebellion against the desolation that surrounded her. Tom watched Clara as she toiled, a silent admiration swelling within him. He saw in her the resilience of the land itself, a spirit that refused to be extinguished. Yet, he, too, felt the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The farm's future lay in ruins, and with it, the dreams of a life built on hard work and perseverance. He picked up his shovel and joined her, the rhythmic sound of metal against earth merging with the soft whispers of the wind. Together they worked, side by side, etching a new story into the desolate landscape. As the weeks wore on, the air grew heavy with uncertainty. The government's response to the disaster began to take shape, though it felt like a distant promise amidst the chaos. The Soil Conservation Service was established, a beacon of hope for a new beginning. Tom and Clara listened intently as news of new farming practices spread through the town. The words crop rotation and contour plowing floated in the air, mingling with the dust as they gathered in the local community hall. They felt the stirrings of change, a faint glimmer of optimism flickering in the darkness. Yet, the reality of their situation pressed heavily on their hearts. Clara could not shake the feeling of mourning for what had once been. The laughter of children echoed in her mind like haunting specters. Families had packed their belongings, leaving behind the homes they had built and the memories they had forged. She and Tom would often stand at the edge of town, gazing at the empty houses, the silence swallowing the stories they held within their walls. The streets, which had once been vibrant with the bustle of daily life, were now lined with abandoned cars, their rusted frames standing as monuments to dreams deferred. Clara could almost hear the echoes of neighbors' conversations, the sounds of children playing, and the faint strains of music drifting from the local dance hall, now silent. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and violet, Clara ventured out to the remnants of the town square. The cobblestones, once bustling with life, were now coated in dust, a sepulcher of memories. She traced her fingers along the rough surface, feeling the grooves and cracks that told tales of laughter and sorrow. It was here that she first met Tom, where they danced in the glow of lanterns, their hearts filled with the promise of a future. But the future had shifted, and the dreams that once felt tangible were now elusive. Clara turned to leave, but not before catching sight of a single wildflower pushing through the cracks in the pavement. It stood defiant against the odds, a vivid splash of color against the muted backdrop of despair. A smile broke through Clara's sorrow, a small reminder that life in its tenacity could still find a way. As the weeks unfurled like the dusty pages of an old book, the people of Boise City began to rebuild, piece by piece. They banded together, sharing resources and labor, their bonds strengthened by the trials they faced. The rhythm of life resumed, albeit in a different form, slower, more deliberate. There was a new understanding of the land and its fragility, a respect born of hard lessons learned. The dust storms would not vanish overnight, nor would the scars of the past fade quickly. But in the quiet moments, as Clara and Tom tended to their garden, they found solace in the knowledge that they were not alone. Together, they were part of a tapestry stitched from resilience and hope, woven through the fabric of their community. And as they planted each seed, they whispered promises to the soil, to nurture, to respect, to honor the land that had once given them so much. The dust might have settled, but from it, new beginnings would rise. In the stillness of the night, as whispers of the past drift like soft shadows across the land, the legacy of the Dust Bowl emerges, a tapestry woven with threads of both sorrow and resilience. This was not merely a chapter in the annals of American history. It became a crucible, forging a new understanding of the relationship between humanity and the earth. As decades unfurled like the wings of a great bird, the memories of those harrowing years were both preserved and transformed, echoing in the hearts of generations that followed. The Dust Bowl was not quickly forgotten. Its scars upon the Great Plains, those vast stretches of earth once vibrant with golden wheat, remained etched in the minds of those who lived through it. In the years that followed, the stories of Clara Johnson and Tom Thompson, along with countless others, took on a life of their own. They were told and retold in a way that both honored their struggles and sometimes oversimplified the complexities of their experiences. The narratives became mythologized, painted with broad strokes of heroism and despair. They transformed into cautionary tales, not just about the consequences of ecological negligence, but also about the indomitable spirit of those who faced adversity. In the 1940s, as World War II raged across oceans, the echoes of the Dust Bowl resonated through the agricultural policies of the day. The United States, seeking to bolster its food production for both soldiers and civilians, turned its gaze back to the Great Plains. The Soil Conservation Service, born from the ashes of that ecological catastrophe, became a beacon of hope. It introduced new farming techniques, advocating for crop rotation, contour plowing, and the planting of cover crops. Farmers learned to respect the land, understanding that it was not merely a resource to exploit, but a living entity deserving of care. Yet, the memories of the Dust Bowl were not solely grounded in policy and practice. They seeped into the cultural fabric of America, inspiring songs, literature, and art. In John Steinbeck's The Grapes of Wrath, the plight of the Joad family became emblematic of the struggle faced by many. Their journey from the desolation of Oklahoma to the promise of California resonated deeply, encapsulating the hope and despair that defined an era. Songs of the Dust Bowl, like Woody Guthrie's poignant ballads, echoed the pain of loss and the yearning for a better tomorrow. They became anthems of resilience, a reminder that even in the darkest times, the human spirit could rise. As the years rolled on, the Great Plains began to heal. The land, once ravaged by relentless winds and choking dust, slowly started to recover. Grasslands returned, their lush green carpets softening the harsh contours of the earth. Farmers, equipped with new knowledge, nurtured their fields, and the cycle of life began anew. The scars of the past faded, though the memories remained, a bittersweet reminder of a time when nature's fury was met with human tenacity. But the legacy of the Dust Bowl extended beyond the plains and into the consciousness of a nation. It sparked conversations about environmental stewardship, the importance of sustainable practices, and the delicate balance between progress and preservation. The lessons learned during those difficult years prompted a wave of environmental awareness, leading to the establishment of the National Park System and the formation of organizations dedicated to conservation. People began to understand that the land was not merely a backdrop for human ambition, but a vital partner in the story of life itself. Yet, even as the legacy took shape, shadows lingered. The mythologizing of the Dust Bowl often glossed over the profound suffering experienced by its victims. The pain of displacement, the loss of livelihood, and the deep emotional scars were sometimes lost in the heroic narratives. Families like the Thompsons and the Johnsons faced not only the physical challenges of drought and dust, but also the internal struggles of hope, despair, and identity. Their stories became intertwined with the broader narrative of the American experience. Yet the personal toll was often overshadowed by the grandiosity of collective resilience. As the late 20th century approached, the Dust Bowl's legacy continued to unfold, shaping not just agricultural practices, but also influencing the very way we think about our relationship with the environment. The lessons of that era echoed in discussions about climate change and sustainable living. The once dusty fields became a symbol, a reminder that neglecting the earth could lead to devastation. The Dust Bowl taught us that the land is not a mere commodity. It is a living, breathing partner in our existence. In the quiet corners of the Great Plains, whispers of the past still linger. The wind carries the stories of Clara and Tom, their struggles woven into the very fabric of the soil. As farmers today tend to their fields, they do so with an understanding born from the legacy of those who came before. They plant their crops with care, listening to the rhythms of the earth, aware of the delicate balance they must maintain. The Dust Bowl, while a period of profound loss, became a catalyst for change, a reminder that resilience often arises from the ashes of despair. And so as we look to the horizon, we carry with us the lessons of the Dust Bowl, the echoes of laughter and tears, of desperation and hope. The land once choked with dust now thrives with life, a testament to the enduring human spirit. The legacy of that trying time is not just a story of survival.